Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. As the dust sets from testing in Bahrain, everyone wants to know exactly how good the Red Bull is. It was not clear in testing really at all how good that car is, especially in the hands of Max Verstappen, but Red Bull are coming out today and effectively admitting they are the third fastest car at best, as far as they currently believe. McLaren, of course, ahead of them, as everyone believes, but Ferrari, the other team that they place ahead of the Red Bull car as it stands. There's been lots of questions about Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, who has the strongest car on paper. The reality is we simply don't know, and it's probably going to be largely track dependent into the start of the season. Australia is just around the corner. Aston Martin have just brought in Adrian Newey. He started today at a massive challenge ahead of him, as we're going to get into. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new, as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, this image is here for a very good reason, as is this one, because Adrian Newey's first day with the team was today, Monday, March the 3rd. They got him from Red Bull. We know that Red Bull probably would like to have Newey on board right now to diagnose some of the issues that they are working on, but there was lots of talk about this today, and for good reason, right? Because Newey has started his first day with the team. Is he going to work that much on the 2025 car? That is a matter for debate. Some people think, even Alonso said that Newey had told him that he'll do what he can, as it were. Like, he'll probably look at the concepts, because fundamentally, these are ground effect regulations now, and they still will be for 2026. So what the team is currently working on is relevant for Newey to know, so he can tell them what not to do for next year, hypothetically. I do find it funny how they brought in the might of Adrian Newey, and he's joining another team, kind of like where Red Bull were when it was Jaguar, and then Red Bull came along, where he's trying to build a car that can win a championship for a team which has not got close to that. They're trying to bring on the resources, Lawrence Stroll and the team, but apart from the early part of 2023, they've not really made the strides they would have wanted to, and according to rumours in the paddock, the Aston Martin this year is a bit of a shambles right now. They're not very happy with the development direction they have taken. So that makes Newey's job even harder in many respects, and what also makes his job maybe harder is that even if he does produce a spectacular car for 2026, Lance Stroll's probably going to be driving it, right? Like, I think that is the question on everyone's lips, is like, Newey's going to cook up a rocket ship, and then Newey's going to, see it get driven into the gravel at Brazil by Stroll. That's not necessarily going to make him feel especially satisfied, but, the challenge will. I'm sure the money isn't bad either, but today was the official start date. This, though, was a quite remarkable announcement that was coming out today, that apparently Newey has plans, and therefore the team has planned as well, to potentially consider the option of him staying overnight on occasion. Aston Martin have reportedly prepared somewhere for Newey to sleep at the factory. This was at Newey's request, who is prepared to work overnight on the 2026 car. So, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, this guy is committed to the project. He's committed to the turnarounds. And hopefully, as far as I'm concerned, Lawrence Stroll and the team are committed to putting the best possible drivers in that car in due course, because they've got everything else. And look, at the end of the day, whatever this year's car does, and it may be terrible, the focus has and always will be, frankly, on 2026. That's where Newey's attention will be directed. I'm sure that since the rules were confirmed, and since he's been able to work on this over the last couple of months in the private of his own drawing room, I suppose, at home or whatever, he will have cooked up some ideas, and he's prepared to take that to the next level. This is what surprised me when Newey was leaving Red Bull and there were suggestions that he might retire. I was like, I don't really think people understand Newey and the level of competitor that he is. Like, this guy's not just at Aston Martin for a bag, he's here for the challenge, right? Like, he wants to produce another championship-winning car, as he has done for Williams, as he has done for McLaren, and as he has done on multiple occasions now for Red Bull Racing as well. Aston would be another one to add to the list. Ferrari, maybe he could have gone there, but he had certain demands. He wanted veto powers, we believe, over the decisions that Fred Vasseur made. Vasseur wasn't prepared to give that up. Newey went to Aston Martin, where he could have and does have effectively full control of the technical department over there as their managing technical partner, or whatever they apparently go calling him for the new season. But yeah, this is how committed Newey is. Whether the team around him is going to be capable of actually executing on whatever he comes up with, and how successful that will be, is a question, right? Because like everyone knows, the car is the most important thing in Formula 1. The drivers are, of course, incredibly important as well at providing that extra margin. But if Verstappen's driving a Haas, he's not winning the championship. And Newey's salary is pretty reminiscent of that in some regard, right? Like, he's getting paid more than Alonso, we think. Probably less than Leclerc, Hamilton, Verstappen, although nobody really knows, just because these numbers aren't made fully public as we see in other sports, right? A lot of the times these are very much speculated, so we don't really know. But yeah, this is where we think the numbers roughly stand based on some rumours. But let's talk about where Aston Martin currently sits, but what's frankly more important for this year, where the other teams sit in due course as well. Because, well, F1 testing happened in Bahrain. Those are questions: which team is the best, which team is the worst. Everyone is in agreement that Ferrari are the best. There's no doubt about that. Where the other teams filter in, nobody really knows. And I think that this year's testing in many ways was more unclear than previous years, because in previous years, Bahrain has been Bahrain. There's not been these extraordinary weather conditions that we wouldn't normally expect. I mean, it was raining there right on Thursday. It was colder than usual, so there wasn't as much what you might call Bahrain representative running as usual. And in terms of, you know, fuel loads and compounds used and all of the other factors that are the usual caveats of testing, some of the teams were incredibly difficult to separate, even with all the analysis that I've seen. Sauber are clear last, McLaren are clear first. Racing Bulls, I think, are probably going to be ninth. And, you know, I think this is basically what auto racers say, is that Aston and Racing Bulls, they're fighting it out to be just better than Sauber. Haas, Williams and Alpine are fighting out to be the best team in the midfield. Then you've got the top four teams. Interesting they put Haas in there just because, you know, I think Haas are a step behind Williams and Alpine. Haas might belong in their own tier, but we don't really know. Then we've got, obviously, the top, and then Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes. Now, I've seen so many different reporters and journalists and engineers talk about this, and everyone seems to have a different order. I've also found it that I can't really see anyone who's confident in saying one of those three teams is better than the other, and the second team is better than the third team. You see what I'm saying, right? Like, everyone's putting two of those in the same category. They're saying, oh, either Ferrari is better than Red Bull Mercedes, or they're saying Mercedes are better than Red Bull Ferrari, or they're saying Merc and Red Bull are better than Ferrari. Like, nobody really knows. And as I said at the onset of the video, it is likely this will be to a large degree track dependent. Bahrain isn't the most representative circuit. Most of the circuit is straights and rear limited corners. It's only really that middle sector where there are some sweeping S's and the difficult turn 10 that shows a lot about the actual, you know, performance, even, let's say, of the front end of the car. So who knows what we should really be expecting when we turn up to Australia, which is a very different circuit in terms of characteristics. The bottom line, though, is some have Mercedes seconds, some have Ferrari seconds, some even have Red Bull seconds, which is also plausible. Everyone is behind McLaren somewhere, to our understanding. This is what auto racers say. They always do good analyses, but of course this is coming out of the Italian press. So, you know, if there's any team you would expect them to say, oh, no, you know, all's well here with Ferrari, they're going to be the chief challenger to McLaren, you'd probably expect them to say it. Mercedes, to me, and Red Bull, to be honest, all of those three cars are somewhat enigmatic. I don't really know where any of them stand. There's a feeling that the Mercedes is actually a very good, sound, fundamental car. It just may not have the peak performance in the slower speed and the higher speed corners. But that's maybe something they can dial in. I mean, there's definitely some voices out there saying that Mercedes will be McLaren's closest challenger this year. That seems maybe a stretch, but look, if they do have a solid mechanical base and they can add some more downforce to it in terms of performance, they could be a serious threat. I don't think anyone expects them to be where McLaren are immediately, but, you know, if Russell was to come in and, you know, come third behind the two McLarens in Australia, we're expecting performance changes over time. That would maybe be a big step for them to show that they might be back in some regard. I think for Hamilton, he'll probably, you know, he would have liked to have had this car last year, a car that seems like a solid mechanical base. But look, we've only seen Bahrain, and we've only seen, generally speaking, roughly cooler conditions, which is tough to say. But there is a feeling that it's more encouraging for Mercedes than maybe even they were expecting. Russell said that it was actually super clean, although different sources say different things, because AMUS today are talking about this and saying that Ferrari haven't panicked over McLaren's pace. They believe that the McLaren was running greater fuel, or the SF25 had more fuel than McLaren, so actually some of the lap time differences, basically they say Ferrari are sandbagging to some degree. I think even Ferrari would tell you that, okay, McLaren looked stronger, and Ferrari probably have more to figure out, but they think it's closer than it could be. And there was also Andrea Stella saying that the conditions, the cooler conditions, they helped the McLaren too, possibly more than the Ferrari. I think I would also be in the position of saying, look, Mercedes probably aren't as good as they appeared because of the cooler temperatures. Apart from the fact that on the final day, when it was warmer, Russell put in an absolutely mega race run stint. So, yeah, I think there's still so many questions out there at the moment. One thing that makes McLaren the favourite is stuff like this. Crazy Carb was talking about how interesting it is that he'd noticed. And I don't know if this actually was what Zach Brown was talking about, but I did see a clip, I think it was maybe Ted Kravitz it might have been the Notebook, I'm not sure. He was talking to Zach Brown, and Zach Brown was like, look, there's some interesting things on our cars that people haven't actually noticed yet, like some interesting innovations. This may be what he was getting at, and this is what Craig Scarborough says. So on the right-hand side, this is the overview of what you might consider to be a traditional setup for the suspension, certainly when it comes to the pull rod. Now on the left-hand side, this is their new suspension, and of course the key difference is where they're attaching these rear wishbones, at least on the inside. The angle here is much more aggressive, and you're not usually seeing this at all. Now, the main reason for this is aerodynamic, it seems. It's something that other teams maybe could have explored, and the exact aero benefits of this, I'm sure, are only really clear to the McLaren guys as to how that's going to benefit the airflow coming into the floor. This does, according to Scarbs anyway, carry some degree of risk. It probably makes, let's say this whole setup slightly more brittle if the car was to have impact with another car or with the wall. If, let's say, Lando was to brush the wall as he did in Singapore last year, there may be a greater likelihood with this configuration that the car's just going to snap rather than it may not with the more traditional approach. But that's a relatively, small deal. It should be anyway if Norris doesn't hit the wall at Singapore again. And it should potentially mean that they can gain some degree of aero advantage. As Scarb says, this is, as far as he is concerned, the most innovative change in Formula 1 this year. They've revised the steering track rod setup, the angles of the track rod forwards to create a larger aero surface to turn the airflow down towards the floor. Pretty interesting concept. And it does seem to be stuff like that making other teams nervous. But, we know where the McLaren is, we think. We're not really sure on the Mercedes, but we at least know its characteristics. The Red Bull is very unclear because it's not exactly sure what the characteristics of the car actually are, how quick it was in Verstappen's hands, in Lawson's hands. Max seemed happier with it. One thing that was very interesting, I think it was John Noble put together an article on this at the race, and he was discussing how, according to Red Bull, and even Wache said this himself, last year's Red Bull and the year before's Red Bull, right? So the RB19, the most dominant machine in terms of race victories as a percentage term in the course of a season, that car and the car that followed it, the RB20, they described as an evolution. It looked quite different. The RB20 had those big cannons on the back, the side pods were different, they changed a few things around, and okay, it was still a Red Bull, but they did change quite a few ideas for the RB20, some of which worked, some of which didn't. But Wache said that was an evolution. They took the dominant car, they made it better, at least they thought they did, in the same vein. They evolved it. This year's car, he says, looks the same as last year's car, but conceptually, what's going on underneath the bodywork, how they are generating their performance, is actually a more different concept than the change they made between 23 and 24. So they say that even though this car is, with all intents and purposes, identical to last year's, it's actually more different to last year's car than last year's car was to the year before that. Now, what this means is Red Bull have a lot to learn about the way that it generates performance and what they have to do to achieve that. There is some concern, of course, though, among Red Bull that it's not gone as smoothly as they wanted, and there's a feeling that the car is still kind of lacking ease to get into the optimal window that they want it to be in, because as he says, it was not as smooth a test as we wanted, but we'd prefer to find the problems here. We've got to better understand the car down the line. This was a comment actually on that article from Noble. And Dr. Obbs, who we know knows a few people over there at Red Bull, says the car has improved, maybe not as much as they would have hoped. They were testing a load of things because that's what they've historically always done. I believe that most are all unified on the McLaren looking the best, but between Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes it looks very tight indeed. It might sway heavily from track to track. For Red Bull fans, I think the season will not start with wins, but we could be there with some healthy updates. But if those updates don't deliver, then it might not be until after the mid-season TD. That's, of course, the 9th round in Barcelona, where the flexi wing changes are coming in, that we see a shift in favour of Red Bull, who has a full season of fairly rigid front wing data from the RB20. This is an interesting assessment, and I'm not sure what you guys think about this, because there's been two schools of thought on whether the flexi wing change, as in well, they're tightening up the regulations. Flexi wings will still exist, but lesser than they did before. Red Bull weren't very happy about it because they spent a load of resources developing one. They do not have those resources to now use elsewhere, and it'll be taken away from them. Their very flexy, bendy front wing, as we saw in the test over the last few days, it'll be taken away from them from Spain. So is that good or bad, right? Because as Dr. Ob says, look, they've had loads of time working with a more rigid front wing. So they have data on that, and one might argue that when the flexi wings weren't so much of a big deal, let's say in 2023, they had the fastest car. Does that really apply nowadays though? I think it's difficult to argue whether it's going to be better for them or worse, but I wouldn't say for sure it's going to make them better. That, like, my instinct says otherwise, but intrigued to your thoughts. Now, Wache closed out his comments with the following. At the moment, it doesn't look like we are quick enough, but after, we will see. It looks like McLaren and Ferrari are quicker. Those were his closing comments, really, on the way that things currently stand for Red Bull. You know, there was loads of comments made here in the original article, I guess I can kind of bring up real quick. But yeah, towards the end of it, he said the following: it'll be tight going into the season opener, but at the moment it doesn't look like we will be fast enough as it stands. So interesting to me that he's single out McLaren and Ferrari, because Red Bull obviously have gone back home, they've crunched all the numbers over the weekends, and they've come up with their conclusions on where they sit and where the other teams potentially sit. McLaren, I think, are clearly number one. Nobody is going to dispute that right now. That may change, of course, and, you know, it would be premature to crown anyone the world champions based on testing that kind of mindset has backfired massively in the past. But if I was predicting what Wache would say, I thought he would have said McLaren are clearly faster. Between the rest of us, it's tough to say. But no, he says, look, we're not fast enough. McLaren are faster, and probably Ferrari too. No mention of Mercedes in here, but he says, yeah, we're not quick enough right now, but things can change over time. I think the concern would be, though, for Max, this could be a 2024 situation, but the other way around. Last year, Max started out incredibly well. He dominated everything, and then all of a sudden, the car wasn't there for whatever reason you may speculate on. Obviously, the McLaren got substantially better for Miami as well. The other teams took a step forward. The flexible wing technology became more prevalent. But all of a sudden, Max is in a difficult position in the championship, but he does hold on to win it in the end. But it certainly wouldn't have been anywhere near as easy if he didn't have that advantage that he did from the start of the season. Is it possible that Max starts the year in the Red Bull, they figure things out at some point, but Lando builds up such a substantial lead that winning the championship becomes a very difficult possibility? That's not out of the realms of possibility either, I wouldn't imagine. But is Lando, would he be able to defend a charging Verstappen, or even, a charging Hamilton, or whoever you want to throw into that conversation like Verstappen did last year? Maybe not. That's what makes Formula 1 very interesting. So intrigued to your thoughts on all this in the comments below. But yeah, I think Red Bull fans, it's not the end of the world, but the way that Red Bull are talking, it's going to be an uphill battle to win this championship. As it stands, that's the way that they're kind of presenting things. Max, of course, was nominated for this year's, or last year's, whatever it is, Laureus World Sportsman of the Year nominees. So I guess this is largely for what they've done over the last year or so, right? Because it can't be the first couple of months of the year. Who's going to win this? I don't know. I don't think Max will. I think he's won it plenty of times before, hasn't he, as well? It makes sense over the last couple of years. Pogacar, of course, cycling, he was cooking this year, last year. So, he may well win it. I used to swim when I was younger. That was my sport, and still follow it very, very closely. So, Léon Marchand was unbelievable last year at the Olympics and has kind of set the new standard in swimming as of late in many regards. So, he could win it. Duplantis has just been winning everything and has been breaking his world record again and again in the pole vault. And Alcaraz, I've, to be honest, not really followed tennis closely enough to know, but I know that, obviously Yannick Sinner with that controversy has been relevant as well. So will Max win this? I don't know. Pretty doubtful to me, but intrigued to your thoughts as always in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.